My name's Rajaun.
Great. It's great to virtually meet you, Rajaun. Rajaun. Is it Rajaun?
Rajaun.
Rajaun. Right.
Yeah.
Well, lovely to meet you, bro.
Thank you, you too. You've indicated on your website that you're a photographer, a poet, filmmaker, mental health researcher, author, and a creative feliciter.
Yeah.
Who inspired you to become those things?
Great. Thank you so much. Firstly, how old are you, Rajaun?
I'm 14 years of age.
14, man. You're incredible inspiration, I tell you that. Firstly, people that inspired me to be those things. Firstly, I think it's important to just highlight that those things I taught myself, right? So I didn't go to the school to learn any of those things. I went to university, but I absolutely did not love anything I was studying. So all those things that you listed out, I taught myself how to do those things. But the most important thing is who inspired me to believe that I can teach myself to do those things. Is growing up seeing not many people that look like me, so therefore black men or even black women that did most of those things that I do now, and realizing that, well, in terms of what was represented in the media anyway, so growing up in the environment I grew up in, again, I lived in Nigeria, in America, and in the UK, and when I was a teenager, I lived in California, Los Angeles, and Tupac was a big inspiration for me because he grew up in the environment I grew up in, and seeing him talk a lot about things that he spoke about in his music, and also be an activist on the ground and talking about some of the injustices that were faced, but also talking about relationships with his mother and things like that. And people like, Lauryn Hill, like those kind of people taught me that actually, because we come from a particular environment or maybe grew up in council estates, that actually we also have the intelligence to be able to create with all of the feelings, emotions, realities, and pains that we have. And when I realized that, it really inspired me to think actually if Tupac was a dropout from school, if people like Nas was dropped out of school from a very young age, but at the end of the day, the kind of art that they create is deeply intelligent. It shows so much creative innovation. So therefore, actually, I can use my own desire to create by picking up new tools every day and teaching myself. And that's basically what it was. And having, one or two people around me that really just kind of gassed me up and saying, you know what, probably you could pick up a camera, you got an interesting eye for this and for that. And that's what really kind of just sparked me. I just thought, you know what? Yeah, maybe I should save up and get a camera, and then maybe I should start writing. First, I started off writing just my feelings, and then, I realized that I had the gift to use poetry in a way to express myself. And then when I started to realize that, then I would just start spitting bars at lunchtime with a couple of my friends, and they'd be like, yo, man, you got talent. And from there, I just started to pick up new skills. First it's a camera, taking photos, and I thought, from photos I could graduate to making a film. And then from then I thought, what is cool? Well, how about, can I tell stories in a different way? Can I do it on the stage? And then that's basically how everything came together, basically. Just from realizing that knowledge that you can acquire is down to how much curiosity that you have. So the willingness to explore, even if you're not great at it in the beginning, just the desire to just think, let me try it. And that's the thing that really, for me, seeing that in a lot of, some of those people that I mentioned, seeing that they were willing to try things, because Lauryn Hill was a rapper, but also a singer. And then she also did so many other things and realized that you don't have to be in one lane and just do one thing and be good at just one thing. So, yeah.
That's very interesting. Were you on the receiving end of any racial attacks when you were growing up or even up until now?
I think you know the answer to that, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the answer to the question because it's part of our experience. Even if it's a small level of racial attack, whatever that means, or a massive level like what's happening with George Floyd. Like, we always experience it, whether in school, whenever it is that you do something, the kind of punishment you get, or the kind of attention you get, or knowing some of your friends that get kicked out of school just because they had a couple scuffles in the playground, and you know that if the other white kid did that, it probably won't get kicked out of school. Like, that's racism. right? You've experienced that. I've experienced that. I've seen that happen to people that look like us. That's the reality for me. You know, I mean, I could go into details of specific incidents, but I don't think we need to do that. Like, you know, and that's part of our experience regularly. You know, I've had situations with police on a regular basis. I've had situations in corporate places and places of work where they choose to promote people or give them a pay rise when I'm the one that's training those people and teaching them how to do their job. And then they get a pay rise. I don't even get a pay rise, you know, and because they are white or, you know, because of all these other, you know, racial evidential issues. So we have these experiences every day. I see that happen to my sisters, to black women in different environments. Like, you know, probably you've experienced that happen to your mom and your dad or your uncles. Like, we experience this on a regular basis. So yeah.
Okay. I understand where you're coming from. I've been on the receiving end of a racial attack. Each time it happens, I get angrier and angrier. What do you think is the best way to deal with it?
That's a very good question. I wish I could just give you like a straight solution to that, but I think the anger that you feel is justified. You should feel that anger. And that anger should make you demand that there is a change, which ultimately is what is some of the things that are happening now, because everybody that's on the streets that's protesting, you know, and even a small proportion of people that might be also rioting and looting, like, they are justified to feel like that, right? Because the feeling that we feel when we get racially attacked in any kind of way, that feeling is justifiable, right? And in terms of how to deal with it, I think the first thing to do is always to know that you're justified in feeling angry, right? And also then to challenge that, because then there's different ways in which we can challenge it, right? There's either we go on a protest, which some people are doing, but what I choose to do a lot, because I have the privilege to do that, right? So when I go into spaces and things like that happen or happen to young boys that I'm with, I then choose to speak to the manager or the director of those spaces and say, I'm going to talk to you. I'm not going to just naturally talk to the woman or the person that did that to the young people, because that person is probably going to deny it and say that's not true. I'm going to go way to the top and challenge them and say, this happened when I was in your building. You need to do something about that. I need to see the evidence of the training that you give to your staff, because they are being racist to me and some of the young black boys that I'm bringing to this building, right? And I know that that's how I deal with it, because I know it's important to be angry, but sometimes just keeping that anger doesn't change the situation, right? And sometimes actually if you show that anger and you lash out at a teacher in school, you're the one that gets punished for it, not the teacher for being racist. So actually my job, the role that I'm in, is to actually challenge the institution, challenge the schools, challenge the teachers, challenge government, challenge the police about how they can change the structures. So from your perspective, what I could say is, when those kind of things happen to you, you should feel justified to be angry. But after you are dealing with the anger, think about who can you talk to actually challenge the people that made you feel racially attacked. Who can you speak to? Is there a person in your school? Is there a person in your household that you can tell that information so they can challenge those people so they cannot get away with it? So that's the most important thing, is that when racial attacks happen, we cannot prove that just happened. And that's the bit that is the problem. And we need to make sure that as well as being angry, people are also being held accountable. So therefore, they're made to make the changes based on the actions that were made.
Yeah, that's happened to me before as well.
Yeah?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you a question. I had a different question.
Yeah?
Switch the question. I was going to ask you, do you think it's necessary for people to be looting when there have been, a protest?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, man. The first thing is, let me ask you, what do you think about that?
I understand where all people are coming from, but just because someone has been racist, I understand that it's very hard to see that happen. But it doesn't mean that you should still, because then you activate the stereotype of black people still, or do this and they riot because they're angry of a certain situation. I don't think it's fair to let them think like that, so shouldn't have them with reason to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you make such valid points. It shows, just what is pretty evident that, young people are equally as politically activated and able to have, really deeply, sociological discussions, just like we're having now. My idea around that is I don't recommend that people go out and loot and riot, because that is obviously, there's so many things that happen from that. Firstly, the areas and the communities that actually get affected the most when rioting and looting happens are not the areas of people that you actually have a problem with. So when you look at, the last riots that happened in London in 2011, I grew up around Tottenham White Hart Lane. Those are the areas that got affected the most. It wasn't Chelsea, it wasn't Knightsbridge. It was areas where people like me and you grow up in, people, areas where my barbershops are, areas where, Caribbean shops are. Those are the places that were broken down and people were burning them down because they were angry. So the problem with rioting and looting is when that happens, the areas that actually get destroyed are our areas that actually people have had, so long trying to secure loans to be able to get, black businesses and black shops happening. So those are the areas that get affected. So actually from that perspective, it's like we're damaging ourselves when we are looting and rioting, because the places that get affected are places owned by people that look like us. The second part is, just like you said, when those things happen, the people that actually get blamed for it, the people that are, the papers photograph those people as the people that are actually doing the rioting and the looting are people that look like us. So again, it fuels the same stereotypes. Black people steal, black people are aggressive, black people are dangerous. So again, the bigger picture of that is very damaging to us, because when we step out into the shop next time wearing a hoodie, because people have only seen pictures of people in the riots wearing hoodies and dressed in tracksuits, people assume that when you come into a shop as a black boy, that has nothing to do with looting or rioting. People assume that you're going to be here trying to steal, or you're going to be here trying to, be aggressive. So again, the legacy that leaves in the minds of people who already are racist, already have those perceptions of you and us, then it becomes much more dangerous. So then they can use that opportunity to tackle you in the shop and say you were about to steal, even though you weren't. And that's one of the dangers. But what I would say is, I understand the rage and the anger that people have. And when you think about two wrongs don't make a right? Because, yes, something like George Floyd's death is absolutely a big wrong. And therefore people say, well, if they could take George Floyd and they're not arresting the police officers, then why should we obey the law? Why should we not break down the stores and break down and burn down the police stations? So I understand that rage, because it's very difficult for people to do something to you and expect you not to react in a negative way, because I think that's unfair too. It's like someone comes and just bangs you in the face and says, "Oh, don't bang me back." Even if, say, when you were banging them, you were really just punching them and jumping on their face and not stopping. Like, it shouldn't be fair for someone to say you are the person that should be blamed for that, even though the person banged you first. You know what I'm saying? So the question around that is also understanding that the rage is justified. But when I think on a bigger level, it's important to really think about the real long-term consequences of actually rioting and looting, because the people that get the most affected are those communities that actually seek injustice, and then it becomes a double negative on both ends.
Yeah. What's your interpretation of BLM, Black Lives Matter?
My interpretation? I think as a statement, it speaks for itself. But what's really interesting is obviously a lot of people always say, well, why is it only Black lives that matter? And that's where I think there's a question around how the word or the phrase is interpreted. To me, the reason why Black Lives Matter exists as a statement is because on one level, we should believe that all lives matter. But based on all the evidence, we realize that actually white life matters more than Black life. So that's when the idea that, okay, even though we know on one level that white life matters, every life matters, all life matters, but based on evidence, based on the fact that, more black people are 5 times more likely to be stopped by the police, the fact that we know that, 40% of the population of the prison is black male, even though only 4% or 3% of the population of black people in the UK is black. Like, that is a huge evidence to show that. So black lives don't matter based on all of the evidence. So the reason why Black Lives Matter is a statement that we have to make is because based on all the evidence, we know that black life doesn't matter based on all the laws that are being passed and all these things. So for me, that's the interpretation of what Black Lives Matter is. Not that every other life does not matter. The point is black life has to matter equally. And until that happens, then we are going to have to keep saying, well, Black Lives Matter, because people are putting the knees on the neck of black folks, and nobody else is fighting for that besides black people. So we need to let people know that actually our life matters equally.
Yeah. Do you believe there's a similarity in racial injustice in the United Kingdom and the USA?
I mean, my answer to that is there's racism in both places, right? And the way that the racism shows up to a lot of people is in different ways. Because America has a very live history of slavery, and, there are places in America you can go to right now that you can stand on a plantation where a lot of black people have been killed and died, and people have been lynched and hung. So that's a very live history. So therefore, as a black person, if you go there, you can feel it, because some of the people who live there, their grandfathers owned slaves. So the way they carry guns and they say to you, blacks are not allowed here, even in 2020, you can feel that very direct racism. But here in the UK, because it's different, because all of the plantations that were owned by white slave owners were not on the continent of Europe, or they were not in England. Most of them were in the Caribbean, most of them were in Africa, West Africa. So it makes people think that the British don't have equally as strong tie to slave history. But that's not the truth. There's so many slave owners that and the empire of Britain in itself was, fueled by a lot of these racial and slave ties. So therefore, it becomes very difficult to actually highlight the type of racism that happens here. Even though the police don't carry guns here, but, there's so many people that die in police custody that are black. There are so many misuse of force and false accusations of black men, black boys. Black men are more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So therefore, if somebody, says this black guy, got mental health issues, they will just section him, which means they just take him away from his everyday life and put him in a secure unit and start giving him a lot of medication, which again has an impact on the way that he thinks and the way that he feels. So there's so much ways in which racism shows up here that I think is equally as bad to me, because I've lived on both sides. I know that, yes, maybe when I'm in the States a bit, I have to worry so much about a police carrying a gun or maybe shooting me if they think I have a gun on me, or if I'm trying to pull out my phone. I have that fear. But here, it's a bit different, because the fear I have is more about, what criminalization happens to black boys or black men, to the fact that maybe in a place of work, I might never, ever get the opportunity that a white person gets. I might not get the same kind of funding. I might not get the access to opportunities, and those are equally as dangerous, to me and people that look like me, as much as, I guess, dying physically in terms of in America. So, so I think to me on both sides, there's equally as powerful racism. It just shows up in different ways.
Yeah. Do you think there will be any positive changes due to the process from America and England for the inclusivity for black people in our society today?
That's a really great question, Rajaun. I mean, there's two sides of me, right? There's one side that wants to be optimistic, right? I want to think that there would be now a very, very obvious need for change, not just change on a police level, but change in the schools, change in the government and the politics and all the laws that are passed that allow for people to get away with doing these things, right? Yeah. And I hope so. But obviously, we have history to give us evidence that this happened with Mark Duggan. Not really anything changed, really. Since that time, a lot more youth centers have been closed down. Since that time, exclusions in schools have increased. So we have about 1,000 black boys get excluded from school every year into people referral units, and ultimately, in most cases, go down to prison and youth offender institute. So we know that based on history and evidence, not much changed from the last time there was a mass protest and mass rioting. So I'm hoping that because this is on a global scale, so it's not just in London, it's not just in Birmingham, it's not just in Liverpool, Manchester, it's not just in the UK, it's also in America and different states, that because of that, people are now unable to escape from the realities of what actually needs to happen, right? But one of the biggest problems is most of the places where change happens is in the government, in the parliament, right? And then you look at the people that are in there, majority of those people, over 80% of the people that represent our voices and changes are white people, right? The question is, for so long, that's been the representation of those spaces. And also, in those spaces, there might be one or two black people, one or two Asian people, one or two Latino people. And often those people, in some cases, also have removed themselves from our community for so long that even though they look like us, they actually also don't fight for things that actually make changes to us. Yeah. So for me, that is also a big problem. It's not just about putting faces that come from black or Asian or minority communities. It's also having the right people that have the actual motivation to actually listen to communities about the changes that needs to happen and then try and implement those changes. So I guess the short answer to your question is, do I think there's going to be a change based on all of this? I hope so. But I don't have the strong confidence based on historical events to suggest that this is really going to make the necessary change. But I hope so.
Yeah. I like how you said, I hope so, because I'm pretty sure we will do as well.
Yeah, I love that. And that's why, I have so much faith in your generation, because, you guys are much younger. You guys are exposed to all of these things now. And you guys have, so many powerful tools that we didn't have, and maybe we're not a master of now. You have the social media. You have a much more, because I look at the riots and I look at, some of the protests, and I look at the demographic, so that the combination of types of people that are in those protests, and there's lots of young people, there's lots of white people, there's lots of, Asian people, there's lots of black people together, and they feel equally angry about this. And that gives me a bit of hope, knowing that your generation have much more of a joint anger about this than, say, my generation or the generations of my mother and my father. So that gives me hope.
Like how you said, hope as well. Are there any other community activists that you think people will follow, such as Oliver Morris?
I think you're one of them, right? Because the fact that you have the interest and the capacity to have this kind of conversation and drop these kinds of questions and have interest in doing that, to me, shows me that you are somebody that people will follow and should follow, because you have so much fire in you about what you want to see happen and what you want to see change, and that's inspiring, right? So I think a lot of times we always look out to other people to be the leaders, when actually sometimes we have everything we need to be leaders, right? We have everything we need to make the change in our own small scale, as opposed to like waiting for Martin Luther King or waiting for Malcolm X or waiting for Rosa Parks or waiting for Obama, whoever it is. Sometimes we have everything we need to be able to make those big changes in our own communities and in our own schools or own environments. So I think you are one of the people that would be a beacon of change. But also, there are young youth counselor. I think his name is S.M.I.L.I.N.G or something like that. He's a very powerful young black man who I've seen and heard a lot of his speeches in the parliament, but also people like Akala, people like there's a woman called Temi Wale. She has an organization. She speaks a lot about how to get justice for young black men and young people who are incarcerated in prison. So there are lots of names already that are out there, but I think your name, names of people that you know that are actively trying to make changes on a small scale. They are names that I think will be heard for a long time too.
Well, thank you, Kay, for answering my questions.
Thank you so much, Rajaun, for asking the questions and for being so well-spoken and articulate. That's not surprising to me, but I think it's just always amazing to hear that, when I'm speaking to amazing young black boys like yourself, just hearing how well-spoken, how articulate you are, how wise you are, which again is not something that people often assume, when they think about black boys. They think, yeah, you're probably just on madness, you're just out on the roads being just on things, which is not the fact. So yeah, so I just really am thankful to be able to have been interviewed by you today, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.